exploring the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. That's what we do at Kung Fu Podcast. I'm your host, Sifu, T.W. Smith. Thank you so much for joining today in episode number 88. This is going to be a talk with internationally recognized karate expert and traditional martial artist, Mr. Iain Abernethy. I was really excited about the opportunity to talk with Iain, someone who I've gotten to know over the past couple of years, and someone that I have a great deal of respect for his work. In this episode, we're going to take a glimpse of the boy that became a man in the martial arts. We all have drivers that guide us to new places. There are many instances that martial arts are shown to be interwoven with inner development. In Chinese martial arts, you can find the writings of the warrior and the poet, being a better person, going back to the 14th and 15th century. A podcast that is slated to be redone is Kung Fu Podcast number 4, that you can get to by going to kungfupodcast.com/4. And in many of Iain's podcasts, he will also quote karate teachers and their perspective of development of self and your martial art as you go along. During our talk, you're going to hear us both share what the traditional martial arts has meant to both of us in our personal development. If you're a practitioner of traditional martial arts, I believe you're going to find some real value in this episode. There will be several topics that we'll discuss, but two other main topics I really want you to be attentive to is how traditional martial artists of various styles can find ways to interlink respectfully and maintain your own identity. You're going to also hear us talk about if you're an aspiring martial artist who one day wants to carry a torch for the traditional martial arts or have your own school. Then you're going to find some information here as well. And at the end of our conversation, which is about an hour and 10 minutes long, I will review some of the highlights and share an announcement or two with you as well. Now, when the recording begins, you're going to pick up literally right after Iain and I say hello, and we're just getting ready to talk. This way, I sat here last night and tried to make sure that everything was running, and I got in here about 5 o'clock this morning, because I usually get up pretty early anyway, and the Skype had updated itself last night. So when I came in, I turned on Skype, and it said, "Oh, your update's been installed," and I was getting pretty nervous that everything I had set up the night before was gone. Let me see here. It looks like, we're all rolling. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, no complaints. Yeah, happy.
Happy, but that's actually, man, I know that following you around sometimes, like on your Twitter or your Facebook, is like a virtual traveling agent. I've learned more about the European towns and cities and things like that, just kind of catching up on some of your posts here and there. And it's been a wonderful experience to just see how you move around. Sometimes I do wonder if you sleep less than I do, though.
Maybe, but when I do sleep, I sleep.
Yeah. When I sleep, I usually define it as a fallout. The main things I had been wanting to ask you, just kind of like personally, if we were just out and I'd met you and we were sitting down just having dinner and catching up and talking a little bit, some things I'd love to ask you. And then just on a personal basis, because so much of the work and time you and I get to spend with each other, whether it's a quick email here or there, is usually associated with the martial arts.
Yes,
I've always enjoyed getting to know folks who, the person behind the arts.
Yes, yeah.
Those were some of the things I would think of it as kind of like a selfish interview to start. Some things I want to know. And then one of the things I am going to ask you about a little bit later is the article, and I had made a post on it, or at least a note on it too. I think it was in March at the forum there of yours that I love. It's actually the only forum I regularly go by to check. And it was on the topic where is karate or kung fu styles dead? And I've got a couple of notes there to bring up.
Yeah, no problem. Brilliant.
All right. Before I really just start, I just got to say thank you. One of the things that happened in my martial arts journey is that I learned how to use my iPhone, and with that, I learned how to pick up on some podcasts and things like that, and ran across yours. And I'll never forget the first time I was listening to one of your podcasts. And you made the comment about martial arts being for health and practical martial arts for combat or self-defense and things like that. And it was actually the first time I'd ever heard anybody else speak the words that I had grew up with in the martial arts. And I was just astonished, to be honest with you. And then you made a comment one time, and this is struck a chord with me. And at first I wasn't going to bring it up in this interview because it's a little bit embarrassing. But I had for many years practiced martial arts with a very practical understanding, and not a lot of the foo-foo stuff.
Yeah.
I just kind of kept my head down, to be honest with you. I was, I took care of my students. I worked hard, did my training, and then in one of those podcasts is where you made a statement that if you are a practical martial artist or a traditional martial artist and not part of the McDojo kind of systems where you had all this basically backing, whether it's financial or advertisement type of backing. And if you're a traditional martial artist and you weren't out there speaking and standing up, then you were actually supporting indirectly the promotion of the McDojos.
Yeah, allowing them to dominate. Yeah.
And boy, that was like a frying pan that just kind of smacked me in the face. I was there going, I've done a pretty good job just keeping my mouth shut a lot of times because it doesn't seem like it's always well received when you might speak from a practical standpoint.
Yeah.
So that really got me motivated to think about my path, about how I wanted to share stories and thoughts and feelings in the practical martial arts, and find that from my world, as far as the Kung Fu goes, that surprisingly enough, through Kung Fu Podcast, is that there's a whole world of folks out there like that.
To tell you what it always reminds me of is, do you remember the old sci-fi movie, Logan's Run? So there's people trapped behind this wall, and they don't know there's an outside world, and they kill them off when they reach 30. Then eventually this guy leaps over the wall and discovers this whole community out there that he never knew existed. It's the same thing, people get, once you step outside, you just realize that there's an army of us all thinking the same way. We just need to kind of connect with one another a little bit more, I think. And that's why podcasts such as yours are so important, I think.
Well, thank you. It's been one of the things that, to be honest with you, I heard you talk about it once, but I get emails and different types of communication now from literally around the world, from places I've only imagined, or maybe I have to literally go Google to find out where they're emailing me from. Because unlike yourself, I really haven't traveled much out of North Carolina except for the great state of Texas, where I lived in Houston for quite some time. And by the way, how'd you like Texas?
I enjoyed it. Lovely. We had a really good time down there. People were really nice, and the weather for January was fantastic. It was like a summer's day in Cockermouth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can tell you that when it gets down summer down there in South Texas, it is hot, and I mean hot like no hot.
Yeah, well, they all told me, that's it's it can be really oppressive. It's not a time of year, given the choice you want to be there. So I lucked out.
Well, some of the things that I had wanted to ask you was, first, I grew up in a small town here in North Carolina, very kind of rural. A lot of times when I hear you talk about some of the stories and how you grew up and, you had to go hunt around for magazines in order to find anything out about martial arts. Where you grew up there, was it kind of a small town too?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting bigger all the time, but it's a rural area. Main industries are kind of there is some industry, but it's mainly kind of agriculture. Quiet town. The nearest martial arts place to me that was running classes was like 15 miles away. I don't think there was anything in the town. There's a judo club that had been there for a while, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing, in the post-internet days, it's dead easy to find information, but back then it's just, I'd go to the library and there'd be a few books on martial arts, but just basic keys out to do a basic punch stuff. So yeah, I lived in a very rural area. Yeah.
Well, with that being said, first you said it was agriculture. One of the things that motivated me to get an education was the fact that I grew up in an agricultural area, and picking cotton, priming tobacco, hanging tobacco, and things like that was hard labor. And I was like, I've got to do something different than this when I get older. So did you have agriculture growing up? Did you have to work out there on the farms at all?
No, I didn't work. My cousin's uncle owned a farm, so that was the only kind of family connection. So we'd spend as kids. I'd be there every single Sunday, and it was just great. But, it was just basically running riot in these wide and open spaces with my cousins and my brother. Building camps and rope swings and all that kind of fun stuff that you do. So it was. But no, I never worked on a farm at any point. And the other big industry, we've got a big. It's like a nuclear reprocessing plant. Is where most of it obviously brings a lot of wealth and stuff to the area. So for me, I knew that I didn't want to leave the area at that time. Part of the reason was because the school I was training at for the karate was just great, and I didn't want to leave it. I didn't want to go to university, didn't want to do anything like that. I knew that karate was my thing, and whether that was a wise decision to make, it's the decision I made. So I got employment there as an electrician, so that's what I did. So
you were an electrician there?
Yes, yeah. So I served my apprenticeship there and then worked there for another kind of 12 years or so before I kind of left to do what I do now.
Okay. Yeah. Now, how old are you now?
I'm 45 this year.
45. Wow. When did you get started in the karate? About how old were you?
About 11, I think. 11,
wow.
Nearly 12. So it was that was the same, pretty much. I would think that most kids that age get into, I remember vividly watching Enter the Dragon was on TV, and I just thought, I've got to get me some of that. That's it. So and again, same thing. Okay, I want to learn. I was a fairly quiet kid, so the idea of going to a class with other people and just fairly reclusive, which so it didn't really suit. So I thought, I'll try and learn this myself. So you kind of, okay, where do I start? Well, library. Let's go to the library. Let's go to the bookstore. So you're finding basic books. And of course, every book you buy on martial arts, back then, they're not very good. And also, you've got all of the books here. You can't learn this from a book.
Right.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to bite the bullet here and take classes. And one of the two of the guys, actually, that I went to school with, they were training at the club that I started with. So they said, well, if you want to do it, come along with us. So I went, first class was a disaster. I got punched in the stomach. I got dropped on the floor. I hated every single second of it the first time I went. But the instructor said, look, I couldn't spend much time with you today, so I won't charge you anything. So, come back next week and we'll spend some more time. He was getting them ready for a grading. So the next week I went back and he would spend some time with me. I thought, this is actually all right. This is fun. So that's kind of how I got into it that way. But, it's just... Again, prior to that point, if you ask my mother and father, I did nothing. I just was not interested in anything. My brother did judo. My brother played soccer. Really kind of outgoing and active. And then for me, it was just wasn't interested. Hang out with his friends and read comic books, and that was it. So they were always trying to get me motivated to do something. And then so of course when I the karate I quite like this. It was like, finally. So is this something he cares about,
Is this an older brother?
No, he's my younger brother. He's 3 years younger than me. Yeah.
So your family, like your dad or your mom, wasn't involved in martial arts at all. This was just something that kind of organically came out of you.
Well, that's right. But I remember, my dad, when my dad would go to the library, he'd always get some books for us as well, you see. So he'd come back, he'd get me martial arts books and stuff. And I remember, regularly, as kids, we'd take the cushions off the kind of sofa, put them on the floor, and I'd wrestle with my dad. Yeah. My dad used to do Cumberland and Westmoreland wrestling when he was at school. So there was that kind of element, all just playing fun, what I mean? But again, I can remember those vividly, even though I was very young, so it must have had an influence. And then, my dad he was the guy who'd drive me to the classes and wait outside and stuff for me. But they never formally, practiced martial arts. It's not a familial thing. It's just me and my nephews now do it, but that's it. That's the only family connections.
But they were real supportive of it. It sounds like, and encouraging of it.
Yeah, absolutely. My mother, she very proud of me when I passed belts or won trophies or whatever it was. But she, I do remember saying that she just wished I'd took up something a little less violent. and then she goes, I wish you'd done something a little bit less violent, like rugby. which always made me laugh. I thought, well, at least I'm honest about the violence. You know what I mean? So, and I don't think, I think that it's one of the things my mother is squirmish about. I don't think she's watched one of my DVDs or anything like that. The idea of hitting people, and it's not something she's got much tolerance for. So while she's very proud of what I do, the nuances of it is just something. It's like, okay, that's Ian's thing.
Well, my dad had a law enforcement background, and so did my grandfather, going way back into the 50s. And so, my dad boxed quite a bit too. So there was always that kind of, like you were saying, that kind of horsing around and playing around kind of.
Yeah.
That was part of the family setting, and then mine was much like yourself. Was just a very organic. Nobody in my family was doing martial arts. I'm the oldest son, and so. But for something, my mom always said it was somewhere around the time that she actually told me the story that she remembers the first time I was ever really interested in Chinese martial arts was shortly. She got up one morning, it was about 6 o'clock, and I was up having my cereal, and I was reading the paper, and it was about the time that Nixon had gone to China.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal. It was the only time you got news, or at least back in that part of North Carolina then, was literally through the newspaper. And after that, just learning Kung Fu was just something that was always in the back of me. And it wasn't until I was much older that I actually pursued that. And I was very glad I did. I had a note here because it was in regards to your book that you wrote. I guess is your first book, the book on mental strength?
That was the last one. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
So I wrote that it's a while ago though. Probably
yeah, about 2005.
2006, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I downloaded the audio for the first chapter of it. That was released, I guess, sometime later. And one of the things I made a note of it, as soon as I started, probably 30 seconds in, I just wrote this note. Got to ask him about this. Accents sounded different in the audio, not like a different mic, but almost like it was lighter, almost like you had more air in your accent. Has your accent changed over
No, I don't think so. If you ask my family and friends, that they'll say not. What that was is the audio book. It's a weird thing, how these things work. The book is mine. I own the book. I don't own that audio, and that audio is not the audio of the book. It's the audio that was taken from a DVD that I was paid to make off a spin-off of it. So when we did that one, there was a professional director and full team with me filming me while we did the audio for that, you see. So as a result, that will be my posh voice. I will have been coached to soften the accent and reminded if I didn't, you see. So that may be why it sounds a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, now I've never had that type of experience, but that you're being coached and making a professional DVD like that, was that that's got to be an interesting experience all into itself, isn't it?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, what it was, there was a company, they don't do martial arts stuff anymore, but for a while there's a company called Summersdale, who mainly now do like travel books and humor books and stuff like that. But for a while they were the martial arts publisher in the UK before they moved out of the market. And they decided they wanted to do, as well as doing books on that, they wanted to do some videos. So it was a girl called Louise Musgrave who worked with celebrities to coach them on media. She worked with the BBC for their presenters and stuff. And then she and lovely girl Lou as well, really nice. And then she ended up working for Summersdale. So they'd said, well, let's try and get. These guys can punch and kick and throw and trap and all that kind of stuff, but they're not automatically the best at coming across on camera. So we're going to coach them all. So they said, if you want to do this, Lou will give you like a day or two's training, and what a great investment that was. Because just someone who understands the business and then can give you some very simple tips about ways to make sure you cross, and simple things that you wouldn't know otherwise. And I do, when I watch TV presenters and newscasters, I'm full of admiration for them because they make it look so easy. You know what I mean? And it is, you point the camera at someone and their IQ just seems to like drop by 50 points. You know what I mean? It's to come across on camera well is very difficult, I think. And I think through the coaching that she gave, my latter DVDs I think are far better in terms of presentation than the earlier ones. And I've used, she's been director. She was director on that one, and she's been director on a few others of mine. Even when she left Summersdale, we kind of asked her if she'd do it, and she I'll help you do it. And she's always best at really good at making sure that you've captured everything you want to capture and it comes across as well as possible. So it was a fantastic opportunity to to have that, you see, and not have to kind of fumble through and learn for yourself, to have that expert instruction,
Yeah, and
really helped,
just as an observer, one of the things I've always loved about your, like 1 minute, 2 minute clips here and there is that the way that you are very articulate in the way that you say things, and then you're also you're speaking to the people, and having got to meet you, and it was wonderful to get to meet you up there in the mountains of North Carolina, and to actually see you doing that work where you're talking with the crowd, but you're also very conscientious of where the camera is and how you're working on it so that it's presented well to everybody, including the audience who's going to be seeing it on YouTube, is absolutely amazing. So great skills you got on that. Personally, I'm continuing to try and invest in my education as far as presenting things and storytelling, and trying to get in touch with I've actually gotten in touch with a couple of voice coaches who are trying to situate me into their schedule. So I'm looking forward to getting a little bit more professional guidance as well. In that book, though, you had written a comment. I'm just going to quote it here. It says, "I achieved those things by following the process covered in this book, although in the early days, not always knowingly.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm anything special. It's just that the process works," end quote. And so I was wondering, it's been a decade or so since you wrote that. If you were to go back to that book, do you think there would be parts that you might add or tweak as compared to where you are today?
No, not really. I've got a few more stories to tell, and there may be some bits that I would kind of expand upon. But in terms of like the process there, because I think that one of the things with that book is, it's been a popular book. It has sold really well. But one of the most common bits of feedback is, I read it and I went, yeah, that's exactly right. This is stuff that people already know. Anyone who's lived a life knows that stuff. But you just sometimes need someone to articulate it back to you to go, yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think in terms of has anything changed since then? I don't really think so. Probably, hopefully, I've improved a little as a writer, and there's a few little things I would expand on. There's a few life experiences that I didn't have back then that I could draw on and put in the book. But the general process, I would kind of content with the way that's presented. Yeah.
Well, to your point, absolutely. I, in fact, had a lesson yesterday where I was working with a student, and I made the comment similar to what you just said. It's always intriguing how Dad could have told you something 7 or 8 times, and it wasn't until Uncle Johnny told you that it actually made sense, and you go back and he told you the same thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the thing. When I do the seminars, there's a few guys who take me. They invite me regularly to their dojo, and the guy that's the instructor there can teach the stuff that I teach every bit as well as I can. Do you know what I mean? Their understanding is the equal of mine. So you've asked them, so why do you invite me in? Because you can do this yourself. And one of the guys said to me, because when you say it in a different accent, they listen. You know what I mean? So I think that's it. Okay, he's a guy with a British accent. We'll listen to him when he says this, But in a lot of cases, I think that's true. I think sometimes it's just, and I think also sometimes it can be someone will present it just slightly differently, and that's enough to make all that dormant knowledge that's been pumped in by someone else just click. You know what I mean? Just like, okay, that makes sense now. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, now in the book, and I know one of the things that for me personally, and a lot of folks that I work with, everybody does pretty well. In fact, I've got a podcast, the podcast to Debate and Kung Fu I'm working on. I've been working on now for almost a week and a half, and pretty much it's about mindset and mindfulness and things like that. And because I was getting the word mindfulness was starting to come across to me almost like the word chi, like it was some sort of silver bullet that everybody's supposed to take in. And I wrote myself a note, I'm going to have to put this in a podcast, and it basically was going to be mindfulness when the moment sucks, basically because most people, kind of like what you're alluding to in the book, many people do well in their mindset and their training until they run into a problem, that obstacle or hurdle. And then it's kind of like their emotional intelligence, their mental strength, or just their mental stamina, get challenged if it doesn't dissipate altogether. Do you feel that traditional martial arts has at least a partial responsibility for helping the students of the traditional martial arts develop that area, the mental strength and emotional intelligence?
Oh, no, absolutely. I haven't got it to hand, but it's one of my favorite quotes by Funakoshi. where he talks about, that if you've worked years to master one kick and punch, and you've gone through the blood, sweat, and tears of training, he says a person like this should be able to kind of face any task and see it through to the end. And I remember when I was going through a really rough time in my life, really rough. I was talking to a friend who's also a martial artist, and in these really wise words, he goes, Iain, he says, your training will be your salvation. And it really stuck with me, because I thought, he's right. Because I think, dojo training's tough, but life's tougher. You know what I mean? So, but I think through the dojo, you get used to that process of, you know what, this sucks, but I can always go a little bit further. I can always push. I can always just take a breather for 5 seconds, then go again. It develops that resilience, I think. And then so, and again, just like in life, sometimes we manage it and sometimes we don't. But the fact is, we just keep on going. It's a famous Winston Churchill quote, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And martial arts, I think, does encourage that kind of doggedness and that defiance of your own weaknesses and your defiance of circumstance, So, See, and that, I think we... See, this is one of the reasons I enjoy your podcast so much, is it's just plain talking. It avoids unnecessary complexity that people can get lost in. And when you talk about the martial arts as like in air quotes spiritual or mental training, it doesn't need to be something weird and esoteric. It's just simply the fact that you get used to enduring difficulty, you get used to goal setting, you get all that kind of stuff, and you just take it out of the dojo and apply it in everyday life. And the mindfulness as well, the point you just mentioned, same thing.
Yes. Well, one of the things that when I went to graduate school and I was learning how to be a research assistant, so I was spending more hours a day behind a microscope than I could possibly tell you. And this was back before, computers were like, I'm sitting here right now, I have the MacBook cranked up with the Retina screen and all this stuff. Back then, it was an Apple computer that had like 8 pixels. I mean, it was just, you could go blind just trying to read from it from a few hours. And one of the things I was talking with one of my students is that, at least in the martial arts and when we're practicing, we try to control, if not account for, many of the variables that, are happening inside in a dojo or the kwon and things like that. We would like to be able to put something together that says, okay, this is as practical as it's ever going to be out there in case you ever had to defend yourself or something like that. But the reality of it is that life, like you were saying, is so much different, that there's so many other intents and other people are going to have their objectives and things like that that you can't always account for. You can assume that they're not good for you in some cases, right? But you almost have to be prepared to just be what you said, they're resilient.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Just that, just keep on going no matter what.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I noticed, you and I seem to have a little background and interest. I use strength training a lot in my overall workouts and things like that, and I have since I was young. And that's something that you enjoy as well. I think you had, what was it, about a year ago? You had some one of your posts, and it had like 3 or 4 of your favorite grunting faces.
That's right. Yeah, one of the weight sessions.
You were doing some shoulder shrugs or something. Yeah. Is weight training kind of a staple in your?
It is, yeah. And that was I was a fairly thin kid. And my main karate instructor is Doug James, who's an 8th dan. He pointed out to me, he lifts as well. And he'd said to me, he says, you could probably do with, and because I was like a teenager then, so I hadn't got what you'd call a man's strength at that point. So it said, so some weight training would probably help the authority of your technique a little bit, and, just build that weapon a bit more. So then I started weight training. It was one of those things like genetically, I am really gifted for that. I say to people, I can look at a weight and get bigger. You know what I mean? I know some people really struggle. It's not a problem for me. If I hadn't found martial arts, powerlifting or weightlifting would have been, I think, something my body would be very well suited to. So I started doing the weights, and then thought, I do feel stronger. I'm not getting injured, and I was responding well to it. And ever since then, it's been a part of my training. It's still secondary to the martial arts. Even last night, that's what I was doing last night. I was kind of had the weight bar loaded up, and it's been a part of my training since I was about 16 or 17. So 30 odd years.
Yeah, right. Well, I spent many years in the bodybuilding and weight training and football and things like that. So it was always kind of part of my training process. And then when I started the martial arts, my teacher at the time basically just said, "You got to stop." And the reason that I was told that was mostly at that point in time was because, as I've said on many occasions, my interest in getting involved in martial arts was because I was a young man and I felt like I was kind of a wreck. And I knew that I had to do something different. I had tried different avenues, different paths to try to find something. My dad had died when I was 21, so I couldn't go to him. And I finally found my way, after 2 years of searching, into a martial arts studio that I was comfortable with. And he said, "You just got to stop lifting the weights." And it was mostly so that I could focus a little bit more on my mindset and my things like,
Yes, yeah.
Things like that. But once I was allowed to pull it back in, it became secondary behind. So, for example, now I teach the students a lot of times who are practicing for the practical martial arts components of it. I tell them, I say, you got to train like an athlete, and an athlete like a football player, for example, or a wrestler or a baseball player, he goes out and he works on his activities, his skills and things like that, and then he goes into the weight room. You'll very seldom ever see an athlete go into the weight room and then go work on their
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
skills.
yeah.
And so they had their priorities squared away, and that was something I had to evolve into, is learning how, okay, today I'm going to do the long staff work. I'm going to do this kind of work. I'm going to do some hitting the poles, some impact conditioning and things like that. And then I'll go hit the weights. Whatever's left, I'll throw into the weight room. Right.
Yeah.
And but the weights have always kind of been a place for me to help my confidence, and as well as help me release some stress. But when it comes to your martial arts, one of the things I made a note here I wanted to ask you, and you've kind of alluded to it already. Through the martial arts, we learn a lot of powerful lessons, and I guess for myself, I learned how to adjust my life through some of the teachings I got through the martial arts. Have you had some of those same experiences?
Oh yeah. I dread to think of the person that I would be without having got into the martial arts. But the lessons are innumerable. But on all kinds of things, I've learned about the idea of goal setting, the value of consistent work in achieving a goal. It always becomes inevitable. If you do something consistently, it just gravitates you in the right direction. So concentrate on the process and not like fixating on the product all the time. I've learned that from it. And other things too, like what you just said there, that you learn a lot about friendships. One of the things I think, as you go through life, you realize that everybody's having a difficult time of it. So sometimes just getting together with a group of people who are positive, where we'll smile, we'll have fun, we'll exert ourselves, and we'll kind of learn a skill and progress a little bit. That in itself can be massively valuable. So you learn all kinds of stuff about, community and friendships and interactions with other human beings as well. As well as, the core skills of, well, if it all kicks off, I know I've got kind of these self-defense skills in the bag as well. So yeah, so much you can learn from it.
Well, one of the things I had learned, and I'm still learning, to be honest with you, is communication. And it wasn't so much about communication with other folks. It was about learning how to communicate with myself. When, as you were talking about earlier, is when you hit those roadblocks, or you get very frustrated that something was a lot more difficult than it seemed that it should be. And unfortunately, when I got involved in martial arts, my usual communication was the bigger hammer approach. I think you mentioned one time, sometimes a hammer and paintbrush are two good tools or something like that.
Yeah. Use the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, right. Well, I had no paintbrush. Right. Yeah. I mean, there was if I did, it was a dainty little paintbrush that I barely even knew where it was. And I had to learn that I had to communicate to myself that, sometimes things were not going to be the way that I wanted them. They were going to be the way that they are. And I had to conform to the way that they are rather than trying to hammer them into the way I wanted them.
Yeah.
Oh, so you've had a similar experience or two like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was talking with a friend recently, and martial arts friend, and he was saying, that, and this applies to martial arts as well. Sometimes you're dominating, and sometimes you've got to go with what's coming at you. And you're like playing chess. Sometimes, if you and I were having a game of chess, sometimes I'm making the moves and you're reacting. Sometimes I've just got to react to what you're doing. You know what I mean? I think that's the same kind of thing for life. Sometimes you can impose your will on it. You can get your big stamp, and this is the way we're going. In other cases, it's, okay, this isn't going the way I would like. So, to me, the trick is to always go, it's always on the here and now, is what is the smartest thing I can do, the most productive thing I can do with the circumstances as they are at this moment. And if you do that consistently enough, again, it tends to guide it towards a positive position, so.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. That's exactly the sort of communication that, you where you're talking with yourself and trying to find this inner wisdom, or at least some sort of guidance in yourself that you literally you pick up along the way in the martial arts, and it kind of gets, what's the right word, drilled into you.
It does. And in addition to that, I think the martial arts gives you the chance to listen too. Because, I think on a day-to-day basis, we all get, whipped up in the frenzy of everyday life, and sometimes, your brain just needs that little quiet moment to say to you, this is the smart thing to do. And I think sometimes, if you're doing your forms, the fact that again, it's that mindfulness thing, the fact that they require your full attention, and it just quietens your mind down a bit. Or if you're sparring with somebody, I can't be thinking about my problems or my issues, because if I do, I'm going to get whacked. I need to be concentrating on what's coming at me. And that little bit of quiet time, I find, others may find differently, but I find that's often enough just for that little voice to pop through. So I realise on the days where, I'm really stressed or I've got loads of issues and problems, and you think, the last thing I want to do is train, that's the day I should train. Because invariably, whether it gives you the space, and then normally I find that, okay, I've got a different perspective on this now, and I can see what it is that needs to be, what the best option is at this moment,
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about it, because I know for me, martial arts literally helped me change. And one of the things that has been extremely beneficial and helpful for me is the martial arts and me being a dad. And, there's been times where my sons wanted to learn and not learn, and practice and not practice, and things like that. And I had made myself a note to ask you, as a dad, has martial arts been something that you've relied on to kind of help you as far as helping you, raise your children?
No, not at all. Other than, I think one of the things is, I think martial arts, not specifically, because martial arts, it permeates everything you do. So in terms of, any situation that you find yourself in, you're a different person because of the experiences you've had through life, you see. So, and I think, as we talked about, martial arts develops things like, patience, and that can be useful in your interactions with everybody, and the ability to explain things logically, you know what I mean? This is why you shouldn't play with knives, that kind of stuff,
Right.
No, I think other than, and obviously teaching helps because that improves your communication skills, so I was teaching children a long time before I had any of my own, so that probably helped as well to a degree, I think. So.
Yeah, I could see that too. Well, this kind of segues me into the article I had mentioned, and like I said, your forum there has some wonderful folks. I've always enjoyed going there. Occasionally I get to post and things like that, but always some really smart folks too. And one of the articles is karate and most kung fu styles a dead art? And it was posted just in March 2016. And I'm going to read a little bit from it, and then some of the responses that you'd made, because it was really interesting to me to kind of follow this flow. And Mr. Donks had written in, is that how you would say his name? Donks, D-A-N-K-S?
Something like that. I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation. It depends which part of the world he's from.
Okay. Yeah. So, and he made it, and I just want to summarize here in quotes, you don't actually know the original intention of the creators of the kata because it's been lost in time. And then I'm going to share the responses you had written. And it says, I think there's an error in thinking. It's suggesting a frozen in time view of the development of karate. I know exactly what the applications of kata are. I teach them to my people all the time and practice them endlessly. With full 100% certainly that what the applications are, that they work, and they fit in an enjoyable and effective framework that has kata at its core.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say that thinking suggests that only a historical application is valid. It also suggests that we must endlessly theorize as to what could have been, even though we have no way if we are right or not. Pragmatism and practicality is what gives us validity, not an unplayable game of historical snap.
Yeah.
In that, and I know that in the passion of which you teach and how you approach your craft, you are very confident that you can teach and share that what the applications of the katas are and things like that. And I work with a few folks who have met you in the karate realm and things along those lines, are extremely impressed with your knowledge base and skill sets. Is that kind of thinking something that you run into periodically?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's based on a flawed assumption that, that karate was kind of, it's been the way that it's been forever. It's been constantly evolving. No generation has passed it on without change. So it's a fluid thing anyway. So to try and reach back for some grand ultimate that existed in the past, I think it's an error. As a friend of mine said, he goes, name any other field of human endeavor and nobody thinks it reached perfection in the 1940s. We've got better cars now, better homes now, everything's improving. So we want to kind of make that contribution to karate too. And then with regards to the forms, we did have this kind of historical blip where, for a significant period of time, whatever it was, 30, 40 years, bad applications were practiced, or people practiced forms without applications. So people of my ilk have gone, well, okay, we want to know what these are all about. So I've looked at them and go, do you know what? Viewed through the lens that the old masters provided, that they gave us the Rosetta Stone, if you like, if not, they told us how we should look at them. Viewed through that, we come up with things, this really works, this is really functional, this is really effective. So as a result, there's things that come from my traditional karate that I've dumped, because I just go, this is bad. And I would do that in a heartbeat. I don't have an emotional attachment to kata for any other reason than it's functional. It does its job. And I am actually going to do a podcast on this. So what I basically thought of calling it was Karate 3.0 is what I was going to call it. And the idea being we had what people would deem as the original, so that's 1.0. Then we've got the weird one that existed for when it was, we don't really understand it. It's just do it, shut up and repeat it. Don't understand it. So that's kind of Karate 2.0. And now we're at this new position. So we need to stop kind of second guessing ourselves constantly. We need to stop that. It's been a useful process, analyzing the katas, but we should continue to do it. But we need to move on from that to say, do you know what? We know now what the applications are. We know for a fact, because this thing works, it's logical, it's efficient, we can all the underlying principles. It may not be exactly the same as what the old guys did, but who cares? Right. It's fully consistent with what they did tell us. We know it works in reality, and it fits with the form perfectly. So we've got our forms, our applications, and we should be running with that rather than constantly second-guessing ourselves.
Well, and the process of the difference between knowing something and then learning to actually do it, or totally, there could be an ocean between those two things as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I always, when I'm at the seminars, I always make the analogy. I'd say, look, I know what an aeroplane is for. That does not make me a pilot. You know what I mean? So, when people go, I know what that move's for. Well done you. That's one step on the way. But can you apply it under extreme duress against a guy who doesn't want it applied to him? Because at that point, then you've got it. Not just simply knowing it as an intellectual exercise.
Yeah. Well, I tell the story to my students that I remember the first time I learned that lesson, and I had learned my first martial art that I was taught that I had to use in the sparring was the Tai Chi Chuan. And my classmates who were primarily learning Choli Foot, because Choli Foot for them, they were special forces and ranger guys, and the Choli Foot was a little faster to pick up. It was a little simpler to pick up some of the techniques. But for whatever reasons, I was put in the Tai Chi Chuan, and I didn't have to get deployed and things like that, so I had more time to saturate in things. And I remember trying to learn the art, and I said, Sifu, I think I've got it. Backhand, intercept, center punch. Got it. I feel pretty good. And he looked at me and said, well, that's great. And he said, hey, John, go over there and hit Tim. Tim, backhand center. And I'm like, whoa, time out. Wait a minute. I realized that that was my first lesson. I was like, okay, I need to go back, not necessarily to the drawing board, but there's a gradual process that goes from like you're saying, I've seen it, I've done it. I've done it with a little bit of a challenge. Now I'm going to do it with somebody who's got totally a different
Absolutely.
objective. And most folks never go through that gradual process of learning something at a great depth. In fact, I had made myself a note. I'm going to skip to something here that I have occasionally, because I was wondering if this happens with you, is that where someone comes in and they says, hey, I really would like to learn martial arts, particularly like hand-to-hand combat or karate and things like that. And you might say, well, sure. I'd be glad to work with you and teach you. But it's not till later that they tell you, or you find out that the concept of their martial art was Jason Bourne.
Yeah.
Right. and you're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on, trying to get them in the process. Do you bump into that quite a bit?
To a degree. I mean, I can certainly say I experienced it myself. I remember leaving my first karate class disappointed I didn't know how to backflip yet. You know what I mean? It was, I get that people want things quick, and then being told, look, it's going to take a while to get good at this can be discouraging for some. But the way I try to get around, I think there are some simple functional skills that people can learn from day one. We can spend a long time, a lifetime, getting the nuances of it and improving it. But I think as soon as people feel, I can do this, you know what I mean? I think that tends to keep the confidence going. So if they're not able to dispatch enemies as quickly as Captain America, you know what I mean? Then, well, okay. So, but you've got something you can do, and then they start to feel they can make progress, and we can work towards those higher skill levels as we go. But yeah, I mean, people are always conditioned by that. I think you have this problem constantly. I find when you talk to people about what works and doesn't, the perceptions can be off. So you can say to a guy, like if you're talking about self-defense, you go, that's not a good option, that wouldn't work. And they'll say, well, I use it in sparring every night and it works great. And because they've only got experience of sparring with a fellow martial artist at a distance in a complementary fashion, they make assumptions that I call it mono-context thinking, that they think that all violence is like that kind of violence. And you will get some people that the only experience of violence they've ever had is what they've seen on TV. So as a result, that's the assumption from which they operate, you see. And I think if you've got little, that's why it's important to drill live and, very gradually though, but it absolves people of those, okay, that's never going to work. I have a word for it, but I want to keep your podcast clean. But it's your BS filters. It improves your BS filters if you are if you do the live stuff, because well, that's not going to work. That wouldn't fit. You know what I mean?
Right. So. Well, and I'm going to actually come back to that a little bit because I'm going to. It's going to segue me here. Actually, I had remember reading at one point in time that your teacher Peter Constantine.
Yes. Yeah.
He had studied Wing Chun at some point.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, is that something that you've ever dabbled into?
Not. Peter studied it formally and properly and in Hong Kong, and then he adapted it into his karate. So he calls it adapted Wing Chun. Okay. Is what he does now. So it fits with the because obviously that you trying to mix oil and water to a certain degree there, because of the different systems. They've got commonality.
Right.
So normally, as part of training with Peter, we will do kind of some like live kind of stick and hand stuff and things like that he'll bring in, but it's done within a karate framework, Okay.
Huh. And most people at Kung Fu Podcast know that I'm a big supporter of the World Combat Association, and it's all organically. I want to. This is kind of like my disclaimer. Iain and the World Combat Association's never reached out to me to actively promote or support the organization. It was just something that I found as I got to know you, and getting to know many of the folks there has just been a wonderful treat as far as my martial arts journey goes. One of the things, as you were alluding to earlier, when you're trying to get through the BS filters, is that you have to have a way to literally put up some gradual testing of self. And that evolved into here is me putting together a practical martial arts class, and I share it. And it's been one of these kind of almost surprise things for me. Again, like there's this whole world, like that analogy you gave before about you get over the wall and all of a sudden you see there's a whole community there, right? I started the practical martial arts class. I just let folks know it's style free, it's form free, and it's objective oriented.
Yes.
And so we basically start, and we have military guys, prison guards, black belts. We've gotten folks who are judo, karate, all kinds of folks in it. They come in, and so on one night I'll walk in and I'll say, okay, look, tonight what we're going to do is you're going to start on this side of the room. You are going to get these air shields, focus mitts, gear up. All right, your objective is get to that door.
Yeah.
and and it's amazing how much folks learn. And and it starts off mild. I'll usually say, look, I just want the Army. In the military, a lot of times they'll tell you is go at 40 or 50%. So just, and so that's what we'll do, and kind of rev up a little bit as the student gets comfortable. And they have to let me know that they're comfortable. They want to try a little bit more, and they want to work a little bit more. And other nights we just go in and say, look, all right, here he is. I want him face down.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I don't teach techniques unless the student says, I have no idea. And what I've come to find, though, and I'm sure you probably see the same thing, is that a lot of times when you're teaching a technique or something and you say, well, look, you could try this, here's an elbow lock, or, here, try this trip right here. And you might even find this in some of your forms or katas or things like that. Almost without a doubt, I don't care if I'm working with a kung fu person in Chole foot or a judo person, they usually can go back to one of their styles or forms, and they'll find that little segment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That for whatever reason, and the comment has been made at least 2 or 3 times, and it's part of the reasons why I've continued with the class and it's growing and developing, is that folks keep saying, I learned so much art, but I never really got the chance to practice it.
Mm.
That's really made me kind of hold tight onto that class and just encourage folks to practice their martial art. I'm not here to get you to change a style or a system. And a lot of that came from the theme that I was received with and got from the World Combat Association. And that you, as a chief instructor there, have always presented that you don't have to be a karate guy or this.
No. Yeah.
And so I'm in hopes that the World Combat Association, is that theme, I guess the curriculum there, is that evolving a little bit as we go along?
Well, I mean, because it's an offshoot. For those that don't know, I mean, it's the WCA naturally flowed from the BCA, which is the British Combat Association, which was set up by Jeff Thompson and Peter Constantine to be a purely pragmatic association. It's multi-style as well. Mm-hmm. And then one of the things that they regularly used to do was that once every 2 months they'd have what they call instructor meetings. So they'd have instructors of any given system come up and train and teach, and everybody turned up. It was all in just normal training gear, not in gis with belts or rank or anything like that. So because of its nature, if you were a pragmatically focused MMA guy, for example, you had that element, then you would join, or Krav guys would join, practically focused karate guys would. We'd all get together, we all train under the same roof, and then you quickly realise that, all that separates us really is the uniforms we wear and training method. Ultimately, we all end up doing very, very similar things. It's just, it's not what we do, it's how we train it a lot of the time. So with the WCA, I mean, I wrote the criteria for that, and the idea was not to tell people, look, we want you to form a cross this way or a front kick this way, or you've got to have, it was just saying these are the kind of things that we think a good syllabus will include. Mm-hmm. Now, how you do that is up to them, so it's very loose, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, but one of them is, there should be holistic life testing in the manner that you've described, so that it gradually kind of increases. Now, how groups decide to do that will obviously be for the nature of the group. So we've never dictated. We've just said, these are the kind of things you might want to consider, So. Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was looking at your curriculum. I have it here on my desk, and it's what you would describe as what was that in the Led Zeppelin thing? Tight but loose. There's certain pillars that are pretty tight, but how you approach it could be a little bit loose, and as long as you're reaching those objectives. With that being said, I've been interested in, mostly because we're probably living at a time throughout the world where we're seeing things happen in a way that I can't recall any descriptions, with the types of activities, whether it's terrorist activities and things like that across different fronts and countries. And I remember reading recently that there was what we call an uptick in requests to learn some forms of martial arts, but almost like style, I want to say style free, but not so much of a traditional nature, but to learning like a hand-to-hand combat type of thing where it's not just one-on-one self-defense type of things. It's like, look, I'm on a train and I see a terrorist, or I'm on a plane and I'd like to learn how to protect myself or what I should and shouldn't do and things like that. Have you had to deal with any kind of requests like that?
Yeah, but not as many as there should be. Yeah, I think this is one of the differences you see. When martial artists think of self-defense, they think of exactly what you've said, in air quotes, because I hate the phrase, a street fight.
Oh.
You know what I mean? So, that's what they think of. Well, self-defense is wider than that. So you need that knowledge of things like about your home security. What's the best way to drive? What do you do if you spot an abandoned package? All this kind of stuff. So on my own training, I've done things like bomb awareness courses. And Peter Considine, because of his background in security, he delivers such courses. He will do things on, this is what a suspicious package will look like, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And we did have an incident when me and Peter were traveling where we actually stumbled across an abandoned bag. So we went through the process in actually, but I think that it's that wider element. But most martial artists aren't interested in that. What they want to know is, okay, I want to know block, kick, punch stuff. But self-defense is a much wider field than that, of which the physical side of it's a very small part. Yeah. And especially those kind of things, as you're saying, those wider personal security issues and security of your family issues. It's like, again, people spend hours learning how to block and punch, but do your children know how to answer a phone call safely? Do they know how to call the emergency services? Do you know what I mean? Would you recognize what kind of suspicious behavior you would spot associated with that kind of stuff? These are the things that people need educated on.
And with that message, one of the things I've learned throughout the course of time, that no one makes an impact like you've made an impact without stepping on a few toes along the way where, occasionally where people are not hearing what they want to hear, whether it's intentional or not. Have you had to work through, your standpoint about, this is pragmatic, this is, like you just said there, this is how I would define self-defense, and it would be hard to argue it any other way, right? But it may still not be something that other folks would want to hear. They've got their preconceived ideas about what it's all about. Has that been a difficult challenge for you to kind of take that?
It's been a challenge, but not a difficult one. Invariably you will step on a few people's toes. But I think as well, one of the big things is it's how you deliver the message. Which I always try and do. Is my thing is, I'm not going to get personal. I'm not going to argue with people on a thing level. I'm going to say, look, these are the facts. You know what I mean? So dispassionately, these are the facts. This is the logic behind what I'm saying. Now, and again, from me, there's never any hard sell. So if people go, I disagree, good on you. You know what I mean? That's absolutely fine. You know what I mean? Thankfully, we all live in, well, you and I do. We live in free countries. We're allowed to disagree and we're allowed to have dissent. It's a good thing. And I think sometimes what happens is the people who get the most blowback are often the ones who present it in a kind of an aggressive and challenging way. So it naturally, immediately, instinctively, if you walk into some guy's dojo and say, look, I'm here to tell you that everything you're teaching is rubbish, that guy is not going to listen to you. And I know people who do that, and they tell me, I don't know why I don't get more seminar requests. I'm thinking, I do. I know exactly why you don't get them. because your material may be great, but your style of delivery sucks. Whereas if you can, which I always do, I always preface every seminar with this. Is like, I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. I'm not here to say that that anything you're doing is incorrect. I'm just here. I'm not saying that what I do is the best way to approach things or the only way to do things. It's just my way of doing things. So I welcome the opportunity to present my way. And I will give you my way along with the underlying thinking, but it's up to you to decide which parts of it you find useful or not. And then I always quote MacArthur. If everybody's thinking the same, someone isn't thinking. So I encourage them, say, if you don't like it, tell me you don't like it. If you want to question it, that's fine, And sometimes people will question it in ways that are entirely valid based on their own training and experience. They'll go, I don't like this because of X. And you think, you know what, from your perspective, that's a logical argument, you know.
Well,
So, and I
yeah.
think when you don't give that hard sell, then people open up, and then, you know, then either whether they accept or reject, you haven't upset many people along the way, you know.
Well, one of the things I've loved about talking with you and listening to you a lot of times is you have, you know, quotes of like Winston Churchill and folks like that, and a lot of times I'm quoting football coaches, and and to your point there, one of the things that reminds me of is that when I'm teaching students, a lot of times I'll say, you know, Bill Parcells was one of my favorite football coaches of all time, and I remember him making the comment that he had two receivers. One was kind of short and fast. The other was tall and could really jump and grab the ball. And he described him, and the one who was really tall was always trying to do things that the shorter one, the types of routes and running things. And he looked at him one day, he said, you know, you're a giraffe and that's a zebra. You know, quit trying to be the zebra and be the giraffe. A lot of times when I'm translating techniques, it's almost like I really have to slow down. And when I'm working with a 145-pound, 5'3", 5'4" young lady, trying to look at it and go through it from her perspective is one of those things where I can go, okay, I can see why you may be challenged with this as compared to why I may not be.
Yeah.
But that's, for me, it's one of the most rewarding components of practicing martial arts is that much like you and I, we don't, you know, we've talked about and came together on a couple of topics and things like that, but having someone who gives me good feedback of their perspective and things like that, and it may not necessarily be exactly how I thought about it or how I may see it myself, but I could also see the validity in many cases of theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's one of the, getting to know you and how you teach. That's been one of the most beautiful things about learning a lot. I've learned more about karate in the past year and a half than I ever knew existed, to be honest.
I'm
Go ahead.
glad that you found that helpful. But that's the point. You know, I don't want to give, you know, my karate is my karate, and I have my way of viewing things. And I obviously believe that my way of viewing things is best for me, because if I didn't, it'd be illogical not to. But I'm not trying to get clones of me. I'm trying to say, look, this is stuff I found useful. Now, maybe you'll find bits of it useful too, but you have to take it with your own prior knowledge. One of my favourite ones for this is Chris Wilder, you know, a Goju guy based in Seattle, wrote a load of really good books, Well, the first time Chris came to the UK, he taught a session at the judo club that I teach at as well. So we had people coming from Scotland and Northern England, and we're driving home, and Chris, you know, is sitting in the car, and he says to me, he goes, how did you enjoy that? I goes, really did like it. I'm stealing this off you. I love the way you do that. You know, we're going to take this. And then Chris's way of generating power is more structural, whereas my way of generating power is more rotational.
Okay.
So although there is some crossover, they're a little bit different. So then Chris said to me, and you know, Chris can hit like a mule, and you know, so there's no, it works, but it's different. And then he said to me, he goes, what about the power generation stuff? And I said, Chris, I loved it. I said, it just doesn't fit with the way that we move. And he went, well, of course, he said. He goes, no one tries to put Ford parts on a Peugeot car, do they? You know, and I thought that was a perfect analogy. Do you know what I mean? Because whatever you're doing needs to fit within the wider context of what you're doing. So sometimes something's not wrong or right. It's just, is it wrong or right for that person, or wrong or right for that context, or wrong or right within that wider skill set? You know, and measure by result, and you can't go far wrong, really.
One of my favorite quotes that I have from you is that it says, I've always said that for me, my martial arts need to be both life-enhancing, fun, and life-preserving, combative skill and health. For me, karate is the methods that fits those two requirements most effectively. It is functional, enjoyable, and I can do it for the whole of my life, albeit in differing ways. If I was going to encapsulate martial arts of any kind, that would pretty much cover it. You know, that you could enjoy it, live your life through it, promote your health, develop some skills to keep yours and your family safe and things along those lines. You've been doing this for a long time now. And do you still feel the same way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, and I'm really glad that quote resonates with you, because that's it for me. If it was just enjoyable but had no functional use, I wouldn't be interested in it. If it just had functional use but wasn't enjoyable, I wouldn't be interested in it. It needs to do all of them. And, you know, that kind of, one of the things as well, it needs to be lifelong for me. So, for example, I think it's one of the things that the traditional martial arts don't sell enough. When we're in the marketplace of when we're, you know, telling people why traditional arts are good, one thing we don't emphasize enough is you can do it the whole of your life. You can't say the same of boxing. You know what I mean? You can do boxing for a certain time period, then you can move into coaching or something like that, but you can't actively do it in the way that you once could. But there's a child's version of karate. You'll reach your teens, then you want to get that proving yourself point of it, so you can compete and you can do all that kind of fun stuff. You get a little bit older, and now you're worried about your family and you and yours, so we'll give you the skills to help you protect what you've got. As you get a bit older still, you want to keep a body that's functional and healthy, so we'll help you do that too. It needs to do all of that for me, and that's why, all martial arts are good. It's a matter of choosing the right one for you, but for me, karate is the one that ticks those boxes for me. I do find it enjoyable. It is good for my health, and I do find it functional, so I'm happy with it.
Yeah, and that's very, very much the same for the same reasons. You made a comment earlier, and I've told many of my students the same thing, that, I started martial arts because I needed to be a better person in many ways. And I've told folks since then is that you wouldn't want to have known me if I didn't practice the martial arts, because I didn't even like myself to a degree. There were things about myself that I knew had to evolve and change as I was going through things. And having that part of having fun with it, finding it functional both at a combative level, a developmental level, you can evolve the variables a little bit so you can continue to practice well into your later years. I only have two other things here on my notes, and one of them is, do you have any questions for me?
No, not really.
Okay.
If I did have had, we've discussed them anyway. You see, in the back and forth conversations. This is one of the reasons why I enjoy listening to you, because one thing that always amazes me with your podcast is the depth of information you put out there. And when you're getting them out as frequently as you are, because if people don't know, you and I know because we do it. Putting a podcast out takes some work. If it's 30 minutes long, it took a long time to record, to edit, to put the music on, to whatever else you need to do. So the width of the topics you cover and the depths you cover them and the frequency with which you get these high quality podcasts out blows me away, really. Yeah. But what again? Every time I listen to you, think I've got to up my game. But the content, I know we're on a similar wavelength because that's why I enjoy listening to you. So, but I mean, one thing, how do you do that? That we want to do, in terms of your podcasting schedule.
Well,
how on earth do you manage that work rate? Is ridiculous.
Well, I'll be honest with you. First, when I started listening to your podcast, and they were like 45 minutes to an hour long, I started learning how to do the podcast. It took me, I don't know, I would dare say 7 hours of work to put together a 15, 20-minute podcast. And some of it was the technical components of it. And then other parts of it, literally, you have a fantastic language, your vocabulary and things like that. And then when I'm in communication with people like Dr. Ben Junkins and some of the other folks who I, gotten to know very well, I literally was I felt like I was going back to school, and I was trying to learn how to do the technical components of a podcast and then also learning a language. I mean, I had no history. If I was in history class, I got through it. I don't recall it. Didn't have the language of an anthropologist or an, ethnographic researcher and things like that. Now, I had to go look up what an ethnographic researcher is. And then I've literally been in situations where I looked up a word and then I had to go look up the meaning of the meaning I had just gotten. That really made me appreciate how much effort and time you put in your podcast. And you're absolutely right. When you hear one of my podcasts that are 30 to 50 minutes long, that's many, many hours of work sitting there behind it. But the reason that I got started with the podcast was, as I said before, is part of your motivation. I felt like in the world of Kung Fu, I wanted there to be something that was not magical chi fighting and, this other stuff. And I really wanted to put something out there that was transparent and that folks could listen to and get something out of, and me not trying, like you said earlier, I'm not trying to hard sell anything on that podcast and in this podcast. Actually, talking with you, I actually forget that we're recording a podcast now. But because it is so organic and comes from my heart, I wanted to do it, and I knew that the only way that I could make an impact was to be consistent, transparent, and authentic.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who was coaching me a little bit as far as learning the technical components of podcasting said, well, a weekly schedule is the best schedule to try to generate traction. And I'm going to tell you, it took a toll on me personally because I had no idea how much work was involved. And since then, I've actually alluded to in the last podcast, about 15 podcasts ago, the game got upped. Somewhere this standard changed. And the 20-minute podcast has turned into like a 30, 45-minute podcast. And I think in the last podcast, I read almost 40 resources, trying to put these things together into a story that made sense. And then I did all this recording and came in and it didn't sound right. And I hit delete and started the whole thing over again. I've learning how to put in a schedule, my research, the recording, and the editing now is pretty simple. I've gotten a lot better about how I articulate things and things like that. So that's actually helped me a lot. The only way I could tell anybody, and I get people all the time, I'm sure you do, is like, I'd like to do a podcast on so-and-so or this and that. And I said, well, I wish you the best because it is a tremendous amount of work and you're going to have to dedicate a chunk of your week or a month to pull it off. I saw a picture of you one time sitting in a coffee shop with your iPad and a keyboard. Is that where you do most of your work?
No, I know which one you mean. It was when I was visiting family in Germany, that one. No, most of my writing is done it's in the office I'm standing in now. So it's a room of my home. So that's where I do more. And sometimes, again, I have an iPad with a Bluetooth keyboard because I travel so much. If I end up, sometimes, flight's delayed and I'm great, I can catch up on some work. You know what I mean? It's so I try and sneak the moments whenever I can. But even then, I'm getting podcasts out maybe once a month, once every 5 or 6 weeks. So to do one weekly at the quality that you do is good. But see, people forget this, I think, is there's sometimes an assumption that it works the other way around. So you and I kind of, we're known within our martial communities. But the reason we're known is because we did the work. Nobody knocked on the door and said, hey, Tim, we really like what you're doing. Do you want a podcast? And no one said to me, we like what you're doing. Do you want to write a book? You've got to get that information out there yourself, And one thing I think that I'm sure you would echo it is, just encourage people in whatever way. If people have got good ideas in this internet age, whether it's writing a blog post or writing a forum post or posting videos up to YouTube, the more of us there are like us who have respect for traditional martial arts but aren't we don't deify them, we can still question them as well. The more of us there are getting our thoughts out, I think the better it is for the arts themselves, And I know loads of guys, I say, I'm moving that karate circle. I love your podcast for that reason, because it's that, educated questioning of what we do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I made in the last podcast too, and I try to say it quite a bit, is I would love for the traditional martial artists to continue to try to come together, irregardless of their styles and systems, to support one another, so that we could have almost like like a network of support, and that the art itself is still alive, and the folks that want to practice in a traditional sort of way, in a pragmatic sort of way, are just as wonderful as those who want to practice for sport or tournaments and movies and things like that, which, those are all different areas that you could apply maybe some of the same techniques, but the approach to the art is different. And I know you and I share several people who, follow both of us. One is Gretchen, who I like to say, hey, Gretchen, right? I like her a lot. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And so, she's a young martial artist trying to cut her teeth now and to starting her school up there, and communicated back and forth with her a little bit. And, if you had 2 to 3 things that you would say to any young martial artist who's aspiring to be a traditional martial artist and maybe one day carry the torch where you and I have long passed away, what are 2 or 3 things you would tell them to make sure that you do?
Number one would have to be trained consistently. Because you need to develop your skills. Above all else, you need to develop that. So you train consistently the entire time. The second one is, I would say, don't be scared of getting your head above the parapet. If you've got some information to share, get up there and share it, And then the third thing on the basis of that is, once you're up there and you're doing that kind of stuff, some people will love what you do, some people hate what you do. It's an irrelevance. Just keep throwing your stuff out. And then then it will gather traction. Good information tends to win out in the marketplace of ideas, I think. So, because the thing is as well, and the reason I'm saying that is, it's no good if you get these really talented traditional martial artists who are teaching out of a church hall somewhere, who have got like 10, 20 students, and the rest of the world doesn't know about them. They're only doing a service there to their 10, 20 students. So if you've got some interesting ideas and information and drills that you think can be a benefit to everyone else, the onus is on you to share it. And I think sometimes people mistake a desire to passionately share what we do because we think it will be a benefit to the community. It's not an ego thing. It's not kind of, hey, everybody, look at me. It's like, I like this stuff. I hope you will like it too. So you're doing a service to our community when you share that kind of information, you see. And Gretchen's a really good example of that. She's got that blog that's going really well. I love the post that she writes up there, She's out there, she's putting her information out, and people would do well to follow her example because she's doing the traditional arts of service.
Yeah. I totally agree, and that's she's the sort of person who I'd like to try to support as time goes by. And I would echo the words that when you do decide to find the courage to stick your head up and try to communicate what in whatever media format you decide to do it, learn to develop some thick skin, right? Because it's been amazing for me is that I have quite a few people who love the podcast, but occasionally I may be challenged with the way that my accent might pronounce some word in Mandarin or Cantonese that I can.
Right with you. Yeah, I get that.
and it is interesting enough. I was in communication with Mr. Adam Shu, who is a very traditional martial artist from the old days of the Chinese martial arts, and a wonderful scholarly gentleman as well. And he made the comment that he sits in the room with 15, 20 other Chinese folks, and he can't understand them.
Yeah.
And it's the same sort of thing and so I was like, well, why am I getting held at a standard?
Well, I know. The way I would put it, no one ever won a fight through good pronunciation. You know what I mean? So, so it's one of these kind of irrelevancies, I think.
Yes.
But you do get that. But the trick is I think it's human nature as well. That what people, you can get 1,000 guys who say, I really like what you do, and then you'll get one guy goes, I hate it. And and human nature is to focus on the guy who hates it.
Right. Right, absolutely.
And the trick is to just go, okay, I get it. Some people like it, some people will hate it. And that's fine. You know what I mean? That's absolutely fine. Yeah. You can't please everybody all the time, and if you try to, you end up producing things that's of no worth.
That's right.
You just say what you believe, say it honestly, say it politely, try and articulate the message in a way that people can buy into.
Yes.
And then you've done your business, and it's up to them whether people like it or loathe it. And here's the thing, Sid. This is what I have lots of people around me who I respect. I really like what they do. They like what I do, but we disagree on some fundamental things. And that's one of the things I like on my forum. There's lots of disagreement and dissent on there, but it's always done like gentlemen.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So it never gets personal. It's just it's just talking about the issues. And we had Evan Prezzetti, he's a pressure point guy, who there'd been some talk about pressure points. His name had got mentioned, and he comes onto the forum and he argues his case, and he listens to the criticisms that people have, and he argues what he believes and doesn't. And at the end of all of that, he articulates his arguments very well. But at the end of it, we've got a lovely thread that people can read through, where they can get both sides of the argument, and they can see a good discussion where nothing's personal and it's just based on the logic of it. And that's how it should be, I think.
Well, in case anyone doesn't know who's listening to the podcast, is if you ever need to find it, you can go to kungfupodcast.com/Iain, IAIN, and it'll take you right there to this forum that he's talking about. And it's a wonderful place. And you're absolutely right. the folks there articulate their arguments or their thoughts very, very politely, and it's wonderful. Actually, it's something that was very surprising to me, especially from a kung fu standpoint, because most of the time, a lot of the kung fu was movies,
Yeah.
and so there was always different types of arguments that weren't always presented very gentlemanly. Let's just put it like that. Well, I was just going
to say, yeah, no, but what we did there was, I just thought, let's just think of it like an online dojo. So if somebody came in shooting the mouth out, they'd just be showing the door as the way they everyone else. So we created a tone when we started the forum maybe a decade ago, and the tone has just been maintained. You know what I mean? Is that people they'll strongly disagree with one another on certain things, which is fine. I think it's good because they make for the interesting threads. But again, it doesn't resort to insulting each other's mothers and things, which you see on other forums. You know,
right, yeah. Well, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. You know, just sharing the time with you. I know with your travels and your work that you're extremely busy, but it's been a real pleasure of mine to be able to sit down and chat with you and. Literally just get to ask you some of the questions I would love to have asked you if we were just sitting down and having dinner and get to talk. And I also want to make sure while I'm thinking about it, please tell Peter and Dawn that I said and thank you.
We'll do.
Very supportive. Well, look, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything as you always do.
No, it's my pleasure. And thanks, for again, the opportunity to chat to you and for the great work that you do with the podcast. You went on all them endless hours on flights and airports and stuff like that. You're my main source of entertainment. So, keep them coming,
Well, thank you very much. And I'll talk with you again very soon.
No problem. Thank you, Tim. Speak soon, mate. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
I hope that you found a great deal of value in this particular episode. A few highlights that I would like to emphasize. 1, it's not what we do, it's how we train. We all have similar principles that we work on. It's how we go about it that's really the difference. The second is that traditional martial artists don't sell enough that you can practice this art for a lifetime. Remember that your ability to represent yourself and your system is more than punch, kick, and fight. As many of you who are teachers of traditional martial arts, most of you I know are not part of a franchise or McDojo type of system. You're an independent. However, it's a mistake to think that to the public's eye, you're an independent. To much of the public, you are a martial arts studio, just like I have my martial arts school and studio, our training facilities. And one of us can reflect on the others just as much as anything else. So one of the things that you can help yourself and everybody else who teaches traditional martial arts, make sure that when you're telling your story, making your presentation to someone who's interested in the martial arts, that they can practice it for a lifetime. But make sure that that is absolutely true. As you heard Iain saying, if you're practicing boxing all the time, you've only got a window of time to practice it, and then you're going to have to give it up and go into something else. So if you do have a part of your curriculum that can be practiced for a lifetime, highlight it. If you don't, but you want to have one, find some part of the art that can be practiced for a lifetime and highlight that. The third thing, what were 3 things Iain recommended that you do over the course of time to make sure that you can make your mark in traditional martial arts in the years to come? 1, train consistently. I call that sweat equity. You got to have it. 2, if you've got good ideas, get out there and share them. And the third thing is to realize that you're going to make an impact, and when you make an impact, you're not always going to make everyone happy. You're going to have to develop a little thicker skin. Have a good message, and avoid hard selling and putting other traditional martial artists down, especially just because they're not in your type of system or style. Now, if you've made it to this point in this particular episode, I safely assume that you're at one of these 3 places in your traditional martial arts. You want to learn or practicing traditional martial arts and really wanting to hone your craft. You are currently teaching or one day aspire to teach traditional martial arts. Or lastly, you want to develop yourself into being a leader of traditional martial arts. As you heard Iain and I discuss, there are many progressions that we must walk through in order to become traditional martial artists. There are progressions to making a dent in the marketplace as well. Most traditional martial artists are independent, as I mentioned before, but we can work together even as independents, irregardless of the styles or systems that we might practice, and I intend to try to encourage and to support that. To put my money where my mouth is, I have already invested in and purchased 2 domains that I believe we'll be able to use as upcoming services to help make that happen and to stimulate more interest in us working together. The first is traditionalmartialarts.club. It's our domain now, and the purpose of this site will be to create a network. I'm going to set it up so that collectively, those of you who want to find out other traditional martial artists like yourself can by using this network. The other program is already underway, it's starting, it's in its infancy phases, but it's called Martial Arts Profession. This is going to be a very thorough-based business and marketing platform designed specifically for traditional martial arts. Now, I've listened to and seen some of the marketing programs that are out there for martial artists, and most of them are designed for the McDojo or franchise systems. The independent traditional martial artists are out there trying to learn without a whole lot of support, and if they do have some support, it's pretty expensive. I had told Gretchen a few weeks ago that I wanted to support her in starting her school, and I had to find a mechanism to do it, and this is going to be that mechanism. The martial arts profession is also where I will better address the question that you heard Iain ask me about how I produced the quality podcast for nearly 2 years on a weekly basis, and how it is naturally evolving. It is the place where I'll bring to you the bullet points of some important skills and techniques that you may need along the way. One skill that I'll tell you without a doubt I would highly recommend to any traditional martial artist to begin to practice is learn how to tell a short story. It is by far the most important skill you'll ever need. Every blog post, every podcast, every resume you fill out, every tour you give in your facility is part of a story. You learn to get someone's attention, educate them through the story, and eventually get them to take action that is best suited for them at that moment in time. There was one man who was extremely good at this, and his understandings and techniques are used to this day. His name was John Powers. He was an American short story copywriter that lived from 1837 to 1919. He is often regarded as the father of storytelling marketing. He is also the one who developed a free trial to give someone a low entry point to develop a relationship with them. He created the idea of having installment plans for purchasing. Mr. Powers became international, and he was so good at telling stories and having influence that he went to Great Britain, and he created such a demand for sewing machines that his company, Wilcox & Gibbs, could not even meet the demands that he created. Jonas Sachs, who wrote the piece Winning the Story Wars, said of Powers, quote, "He had given us all we've ever really needed to know. Be interesting. Tell the truth. And if you can't tell the truth, change what you're doing so you can. In other words, live the truth." End quote. Start there. Know what you're about. Your story should tell your perspective, to influence someone about what you do and how it will assist them in achieving their objective. Your story should not misrepresent you or try to manipulate someone into buying or selling a contract. Don't go out there to try to please everyone. Pick an area or two to focus in and develop your stories. You don't need to look far if you're not sure where to begin. Just ask some of the people you're already working with. What's their story? What did they think it was going to be like when they began, and how did that change? One thing I know for sure about 90% of every student I work with, and it's part of the story that I share with every new person, is that most new students start out with an area that they want to focus in. Better health, reduced stress, self-protection, being a practical martial artist. But almost every time, as they get more comfortable, that focus will transform into something that's influenced them along the way. So if they find something along the way that intrigues them or raises their curiosity, say for example learning Bakwa Jang, then let me know. It's okay to explore some on the journey. For those who already have experience in telling stories and sharing their stories, I put together a little bullet list just to remind you of some of the main components and give you an idea of how to build a marketing story for yourself. You can go to martialartsprofession.com/short story and have a PDF file delivered to you. Well, that's it for episode number 88. exploring the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you, Iain, for spending so much of your time with us. And for each one of you, a practitioner of traditional martial arts, I encourage you to get out there to practice today. Do your best, have a great time, and I'll be talking with you again real soon.